Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Thursday, the 28th of November. We're on the countdown to Christmas, pretty much anyway. So, right, what have we come across today? Microsoft has re-released Exchange updates. So the November 2024 security updates for Exchange Server were pulled earlier this month because they led to mail delivery issues on servers that have got custom mail flow rules, which is fairly common. I mean, fairly common to have custom mail flow rules if you are using Exchange Server. Um, so the issue affected customers whose mailflow rules or data loss protection rules were in place, and the issue manifested itself as the mail flow would stop periodically after installing the November Exchange Server 2016 and Exchange Server 2019 security updates. So there are so firstly the patch has been updated. Windows Update will correctly apply the right patch now, allegedly. So it is worth checking that your Exchange servers have picked up the patch. And as always, if you are not automatically patching, you need to make sure that the risk assessment that you did around the previous patch still applies to this one, and whether you should or shouldn't be pushing this one out somewhat out of cycle. So there is what's being claimed to be the first UEFI bootkit focusing on Linux systems. So for the uninitiated, UEFI, which is the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, has been the target of malicious attention for a while now. Reason being, long before your operating system kicks in, your hardware needs to know what's going on and how to boot the operating system. So traditionally, this stuff was done in a very simplistic way, and there's been all sorts of attempts to improve security in this space later in order to avoid people introducing, or attackers introducing, things at that level, because they sit, as it were, closer to the kernel than anything else that you do afterwards. Well, the majority of UEFI focused attacks have been they have been focusing on Windows devices. I think, as always, because of the prevalence of Windows, a lot of attacks are going to start in that arena and then move out. Now, the article that we're linking to this briefing in regards to this is from GB Hackers. The reason I chose to link that one rather than some of the others that are going around at the moment is that they've got a very good flow chart of how this particular attack works, including some the feedback loops and means by which the malware attempts to bypass, well, in fact, or modify even the certificate checking, which is part of UEFI, to make sure that you're not booting unsigned nasty things. So there are, it demonstrates how these different components are pulled together, and which bits of them are legitimate and which bits of them have got malicious code or files or data or whatever injected into legitimate processes. So it is useful. There is also a short but very useful set of indicators of compromise, which actually can be downloaded from the GB Hackers GitHub repository if you wanted to do that, or you can lift them straight from the article. I would recommend that you ensure that any endpoint protection solution and any security visibility solutions that you've got have got alerts for this stuff. Because despite being introduced into the system at a very early stage at boot up, it does rely on there being files somewhere which hold a lot of these things, or things being held in memory. A lot of this is actually around attempting to do stuff in memory to avoid detection. So, but there are ways to get around that. So, as it says in the article, primary objective is to patch the Linux kernel in memory in order to circumvent integrity verifications before the grub bootloader is executed. There's also a link in the article that links out to a detailed analysis of this. So if you want an overview, this is a great place to begin. If you are concerned about security at this level, then which we should be aware of. I think it's more likely that some organisations are going to be targeted or concerned about this than others. And just to put it in context, though, the starting point is the deployment of the bootkit. Then the rest of it is some very clever ways in which that actually leads to compromise. So protections based around preventing users from downloading and attempting to install things that they shouldn't will help to mitigate some of these risks. Okay, and finally from me today is a very good article that I came across in. Sorry, well, I should say it's a very interesting article because I call them all interesting, aren't they? A very interesting article that I found in HelpNet Security that talks about ransomware payments now becoming a critical business decision. I think the article itself is it's more to do with thinking about what happens during ransomware. The article has got all sorts of quite useful, quite interesting rather than useful statistics around ransomware. But the bit I wanted to think about a little this morning is preparing for a ransomware attack. So one of the things that we've seen is that organisations may be very well prepared technically to deal with a ransomware attack, ransomware across their environment. They've got good basic hygiene, good security architecture, microsegmentation, what used to just be called networking, network design. But compromise of devices in one part of an environment does not necessarily lead to wide-scale compromise of the entire estate. Good endpoint protection, excellent visibility. It can catch things relatively quickly, whatever it may be. Actually doing a pretty decent job. However, the one thing you can't guarantee is that you'll never be hit by stuff, no matter how good your technical controls are. There are endless new vulnerabilities being discovered Even if your environment is completely up to date and tested to death, and you're pretty certain that there are no means of compromising it at the moment, that does not mean that there won't be in the future. So, what happens during a ransomware attack? Well, very often it's seen as primarily as a tech-driven incident. What I would suggest that you think about is what happens to the rest of the business. So, if we're talking about a major incident based on ransomware, okay, yes, all your tech's out, but what business impact does that have? Are the parts of the business that need to be recovered more quickly than others? Where's the loss-making stuff? Where's the stuff that's going to impact your reputation or scare off your customers? Those sorts of things. Now, those aren't decisions that tech should be making in isolation. Those are very very much business-focused risks that need to be dealt with. But there are a couple of areas that rarely, in our experience, make it into the ransomware playbook. And the first one is around communications, both internal and external. Being on top of, as they say, being on top of the narrative. So making sure that the message that is sent both to internal users and to external organizations, from the ICO all the way through to media, social media, the BBC, whoever it might be that might pick up on these things. You need to have a consistent message that generally it needs to be not making stuff up, but equally not leaving people feeling like you're floundering and you don't know what you're doing. So manage that and be prepared to manage that. So corporate comms almost definitely need to be involved in one way or another in how do we cope with things, from what to say on social media through to how to deal with press requests. But even more importantly, somebody in the organisation needs to make the decision around, are we or are we not going to pay the ransom? And this one, whilst corporate comms, we occasionally come across organisations that have thought about how to manage communications during a significant ransomware attack. We very rarely come across organisations that have got anything other than a very superficial overview of what do they do when the attackers ask for the ransom. Bear in mind, your legal department will undoubtedly have to be involved in this, but somebody somewhere quite senior needs to sign off on any payments. Is that the CFO, the CEO, the board? How is that stuff done? And if it is, let's say it is a board level decision, how is that decision actually going to be reached? What are the decision criteria around do we or don't we pay? And then at a purely kind of functional, mechanical level, how do you make the payment? How would you get hold of X 100,000 in Bitcoin in a relatively short period of time? Does finance know how to do these things? Or do you have a blank? We would never pay, come hell or high water. Well, that's all okay, but those are decisions that are being made by people who have almost definitely not been involved in any rehearsals, preparation, or planning for this scenario. So have a think about getting the right people involved in your ransomware recovery plan. Make sure if you are responsible for this stuff, i.e. CISOs or whatever it may be, make sure that your colleagues on the board or at the C level, in the C-suite, also understand what their roles are, and occasionally practice this stuff. Just to make sure, because you don't want um, to be asking the CEO to do all sorts of random things in the middle of an incident if he or she doesn't really know why they're being asked to do this stuff, or whether this stuff is right or wrong, or not being certain whether they're being given the right information. Think it through. So the article is just a trigger to think about these things. Um, but yeah, bear in mind that a ransomware attack, is not a purely cyber or technical thing. It touches almost all parts of an organization, and not just from a disaster recovery perspective, as in how do we continue to run the business with all this stuff down. It's like, what do we legally do with the, these demands for payment, and so on and so forth. Right, that is plenty from me for a very chilly Thursday morning. Yeah, okay, well, it's very chilly for Sussex anyway. It's about -1. So, that's chilly enough. Yeah, stop waffling. Speak to you